What's up, YouTube? I'm Zach, and today we're kicking off part of the process to start preparing to turbocharge the 4-valve swapped GT. I'm going to move this out of the way. I'm going to pull the GT in right here. We're going to get started on swapping a K-member, tubular control arms, front coilovers, and then for future videos, we're also going to be tackling the fuel rail. I finally got the replacement fuel rail, and we're going to be tackling a coolant leak and a vacuum leak. Stay tuned and find out what we're doing. Alright, well, now that we've got the hood popped, let's see what we're working with today. And here is the start of the process to putting a turbocharger on the 4-valve. We have a QA1 tubular cross member with the plates. This was originally for one of the Fox bodies, so this might have under an inch narrower track width, but we're going to find out. SN95 BMR tubular control arms, and we have 2 coilovers. Now, whole premise on turbocharging this car is budget. Everything we've done so far has been on a very limited budget. Right, so I bought the car for about $2,000. I maybe have about $700, $800 in the swap total. I've had the K-member sitting around. I think it cost me about $400. The motor plates were an additional $100, so I'm $500 into that. The coilovers I actually got for free from somebody locally, and then the control arms were on sale for $259. But when you're building a turbo kit from On3, which is who we plan on going with, it's about $1,000 extra to get a coilover kit, tubular control arms, and a tubular K-member. So yes, we spent a little over $700 on the tubular arms and K-member, but we are saving roughly $300 to $400 by doing it ourselves. Plus, I get to shoot an awesome video before we turbocharge it. So this is all in preparations for turbocharging the car. So let's get started. I've got to drain the coolant because we do have a coolant leak. We're gonna get the car up on jack stands, which is where it's spent most of its life so far. But also we're gonna be finding out where this intake leak is coming from, or this vacuum leak is coming from. We're gonna be fixing a coolant leak, and we're probably going to be tackling the timing tensioner on the passenger side, but I've got both new tensioners. I might as well do it while it's off. So we're going to do all of that. We're going to get it tackled. That way we can find out if the Fox body K-member will work in a GT. Should bolt in, but like I said, the track width might be smaller or more narrow. So let's get started. All right, so first things first, you're going to want to disconnect the battery, and then we're going to loosen the wheels. So for the battery, it's an 8mm on the driver's side, or on the positive side. $13 if it's been replaced on the negative. And then we are going to get our key. This had aftermarket wheels on it. It does not currently, but I did not change the wheel studs back to the normal ones. Okay, so I've already taken the liberty to take this off. We're gonna end up pulling it out of there because it's just small. It just goes on the other side. Oh wait, yep. You've got, that's the idle air intake IAC valve inlet. So I've already disconnected that. I've disconnected the PCV hose. There's a fresh air hose here that you need to disconnect. We'll disconnect the, of course, there'd be a helicopter flying over as I'm doing this, but we'll have to disconnect the throttle linkage, the throttle linkage. Then we can take off the fuel rail after we remove the upper intake. You've got the EGR valve. EGR valve is going to have to come off. It's 2 bolts. And we can leave that in place for the upper hat to come off. And then we've got 4 bolts holding in the fuel rail. We can lift that up and out of the way after we relieve the fuel over there. And then the lower intake will just unbolt. I have a suspicion that that's where my leak is coming from. It might still be the IAC valve, and I do have another one that we can test, but that one's relatively newer and I haven't had any issues out of it yet. It might just be clogged. So let's drain some coolant. Okay, let's hope that this is enough coolant. Let's get down here, and we have a petcock valve. Yes, I know it's a petcock, but I can get my hand on there. You should start to see a little bit of a dribble coolant. All you're doing is opening up this drain valve for coolant. Well, I say that and then I'm getting it everywhere. Including all over myself. Alright, now we've got it pointed down. So that little valve right there is all that we twisted. This is a 3-core radiator. And then this is the lower control arm. As you can see, they're stamped steel basically. And this big piece is what we're replacing. This is the K member. There's the other control arm. These are called A arms. And you can tell we have a coil spring and then a separate strut shock absorber. We're getting rid of both of those. So we are going to make this entire setup somewhat new. So you're going to have new control arm, new cross member, new strut, and essentially a new spring that's going to replace all of this. So we're dropping about, I would say about pounds total is how much we're going to lose. So we've already lost around 100 pounds swapping from the iron block 2 valve to the aluminum block 4 valve. So we're going to lose a little bit more weight while hopefully stiffening it up a little bit more, because this tube steel is nice, but it's also going to do one thing: create more room and more space when we go to do our turbocharger swap. Alright, so I have taken the liberty to kind of fast forward through a bunch of this stuff. So I already had the EGR valve off. This is the last bolt for the top of this, and they are 8mm X heads. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then do not forget there's a hose right here, right there, and it is for your emissions, your charcoal canister. I have forgotten to put that on several times, and you can see this will create a large vacuum leak because it goes directly in here behind the throttle body. So once I pick this and move this up and out of the way, I have everything disconnected. I hope. I actually think there's two. So I'm gonna have to remove this for the idle air control valve and this last one for the vacuum. And now this whole thing should just lift right up. You're making me look stupid. Lift right up. I think we're caught on this EGR over here. Let's see if I move this out of the way. Now it should just lift right up. And there you have it. That's the top hat of a Cobra removed. Now, once you have the top of it off, as you can see here, there is a plenum gasket, and it does only go on one way. As you can tell, there's kind of a wonky design. And then here you have each individual runner for the lower portion of the intake. And there are two bolts in here. One there, and then there, I believe the other one's right here or here, depending on the model year. Some have them, some don't. This one had them from the factory, so I did have to drill through. You do have two bolts here. These do connect this and move it back and into place, but it's also responsible for holding down the front of this intake. Now, as you can see here, right there, this bracket right here is one bolt for the fuel rail. Here's another. You can see I zip tied it. And once I get this up and out of here, I'll show you how I was able to get by. So this fuel rail, when I bought this intake setup, the guy that had this intake had to have these modified. So he ended up using the tabs, these tabs that hold this down. He ended up using the tabs for something else, so I got a cut bracket. So what I ended up doing was taking this bracket and I chopped off my Mark 8 tabs, because the Mark 8 fuel rail is the same except for the inlets for the fuel are on this side rather than over here, like which would have been on the stock GT or Cobra. So what I did was, I don't know if you can see it too well, but I drilled a hole in this bottom plate. I got it as close to cut as you could get. And then what I did was I zip tied this down. So you can see it's not moving, but it's also not very safe. And if I would have sprung a leak, I could have caught my entire car on fire. Obviously, this was for just testing purposes. And unfortunately, I've been driving it for a while on test purposes. I've probably put 1,000 miles on it, but I did want to make sure to get this thing running correctly and make sure I got everything hooked up and everything was reading. Currently, I don't have any coolant readings, and my oil pressure gauge does not read unless it's in the on position. You turn the key on, the oil pressure is normal. When you start the car, the oil pressure drops to 0. That's not the case, otherwise the car would be in a much worse condition than it currently is. But I'm not the only person that swapped in a Mark 8 and had the same issue. So for me, I believe it's a grounding issue. So we might end up trying to figure out if we can get them to read by grounding it differently. Currently, it's grounded through the motor mount to the chassis. The motor mount's solid steel in this car, but the old block was aluminum. The old block was steel. This block is aluminum. So we're going to try and figure something out there. But let's continue to take this fuel rail off, and then we can get the lower intake off, because I also need to get the lower intake off to get to my coolant mods on the back of my head, because the passenger side coolant mod is leaking, and we're going to take care of that. Okay, so I'm getting ready to remove the fuel rail, but we do have to relieve fuel pressure. And to do that, there's a Schrader valve right here. This is going to relieve pressure. Yes, you're supposed to put some sort of cloth over it, but I want to show you guys how much pressure should be in there if you have a healthy fuel system. You don't have any bleed off. Maybe I should get something a little bit different. Give me a second, I'll be right back. Ta-da, a pick. Shield your eyes. So there was not a lot out of there. I just had this thing turned on. Just drilling out of there. It doesn't smell that great either. So what I'm getting is I'm getting a lot of, man, that kind of worries me a little bit, but I guess happen is when I come to a stop, when I press in my clutch, the car idles at about 2,000. That leads me to believe that it's running lean or bringing in air. I have a vacuum leak. I haven't tested it, which I know I should have. I had to take this part apart anyways to put on a new fuel rail, and it's only a few extra bolts to check the lower intake gaskets. We're going to go ahead and do that, but that's not giving me a ton of hope, seeing that there wasn't a lot of pressure in there, because that should just shoot out. I mean, it's at idle, you're going to get about 40 psi. So, I mean, that didn't look like about 40 psi worth. That I could be wrong, but I guess let's continue to take this apart. But I do have I did put a brand new fuel pump in it, so at least that's under warranty if I do need to go that route. But that's just a lot more work than I really want to do right now, and it's running so good other than pushing in the clutch at a stoplight and it revving up to 2,000 RPM. So, all right, let's continue. Okay, there we go. Fuel rail is out. Now you can see my bracket modification. Yes, some of them were a lot shorter. You can make them shorter if this is the route that you end up going. I do not recommend it. However, it served me well for a little while. Good news is I've got a new to me fuel rail going in, so this will not be here anymore. We're going to clean these injectors up before I put them in the other fuel rail though, but overall the fuel rail is not in bad condition. Okay, now that we've got the fuel rail all the way, the next thing that we need to take off is the lower intake manifold. It's 215s up here. And then obviously I've changed it because I didn't get the hardware to go with it. But these are 14 millimeters, should be 2. And then there should be 2 on the back side. So there's 6 total, not including these 2. And then you've got these 2. So there are 10 total bolts if you have the 2 in here. I do. Not everybody does. Certain model years, I want to say it was Midway 97 and up, did not have the holes on the inside. 96 to mid-year 97 did, and I do, so of course I'm going to have to take them, but then I'll be able to show you guys my modification for the lower intake manifold runner control valves. And then we're also going to clean these wires up as well. I'm going to change these butt connectors to some smaller ones with some solder. And then I'm also going to shorten this IAC one that I created. And then we're going to check for leaks, repair the backside of the cooling mod. And I think we're done. You don't have to take the alternator off. You just have to take this. And then you can slide this forward a little bit without draining the coolant. So that's a good thing for people that aren't draining their coolant. You don't have to drain your coolant to take the intake manifold off. We already do. I'm not planning on pulling it out of there because it's a pain to kind of slide them back in there. And then once we go to fill the coolant, you can take this cap off. They do rust on there, so you might have to get some vice grips, hammer them on there, and then hammer that off. But it should be a 1/4 inch square. Other than that, let's get this lower intake manifold off. One thing I do want to mention before we take this off is these are sequenced. So if you don't know the sequence, it's majority like an X, just like you would for tires and wheels. Or not tires, but wheels. You would have an X pattern. So just make sure you look up the X pattern or the torque sequence. There's also a certain torque spec to tighten these down. So let's get this off. I've been talking the entire time not knowing that my phone shut off, but there's a break there. I don't know if this was up and out. I can only assume it was pulled out a little bit. Let's see if we can find any breaks in it though.
brake there. This is all warped and weird. This broke. And that was not by us sliding it back, just FYI. That you can see, here's the two holes that we're talking about. And then this would be where your idle air runner valve, or idle intake manifold runner. So these open up at higher RPMs. And that module would mount here. And then you can see here, if you bend this bracket back, if you bend this bracket back, there's a little tab there. So as you can tell, you see how this opens. It opens, that's all the way open. As you can tell, that's all the way open. Probably clean those up. It's open there, but this tab right here is what I bent. That one is what I bend out. Normally it's gonna be in. I bend it out as a stop on both so that they're open instead of closed. So I'm going to do a little bit more investigating on this to see if I can find the break, because I'm still convinced this is why we're having an RPM leak, basically. Could be the intake or the it could be the idle air control, the IAC valve, but this is what I'm leaning more towards. So let's see if we can figure out why. Okay. So as far as the K member, we have to relieve this side. And because this is a spring setup, you have to put some load on the suspension. Otherwise, when you take that spring off, it will take your head off with it. All right, now that we're back up top, we do have pressure on the lower control arm. These bolts up here are going to be 15s from the factory. You're going to have one bolt and two nuts. From the factory, Ford did have what some would consider a small caster camber kit. It's not the caster camber kit that everybody thinks of, but there's a plate here and it would have some rivets. You'd punch out that rivet, and then you can see the holes are elongated. So whenever you have this on here, you can actually move it and make adjustments. There's two sets of rivets. So you got rivets there, you got rivets there. With the coilovers, you do away with that, because you technically have your own caster camber plates. And these are adjustable as well. So this whole series is going to be on budget.
Okay, as you can tell by my new shirt, that it is the next day. Let's work on getting the lower control arms and the K-member out. That'll allow us to lower the engine a little bit and get to that backside head. Also, we have to remove the valve covers to get the timing cover off, so that's going to be our next step. Let's try and get that stuff off. I'm going to be using my air tools, because if not, it's going to take entirely too long. Or at least I'm going to attempt to use my air tools as long as my air tools don't kink. All right. Let's see. Forward. Air tools do make the best tools. It's pretty stiff, but you never know. So we're also going to have to measure the preload, because as you can tell, that's rattling around. Again, at least we got the struts in where they need to be. I'm going to tighten this bracket back. Eventually. Alright, so the next step that we need to do is get this control arm off and out of here, because we're putting on new tubular control arm. So the first step is we have to take this stabilizer bar off, because we do have new control arms, and they have to mount to the stabilizer bar. So let's get these off and out of the way. Hopefully like I said earlier, these are what was keeping my struts from, the control arms from swinging down. So you will have to hold this in place. There is a little spot notched in. These slide up and off. This slides down off the bottom and off. And then we have to move over to the other side so that we can take the other one off. Let me do that real quick. All right, so the nut for, the nut for the ball joint seems to be a 15/16. I don't know what that equates to in metrics, but I just happen to have a 15/16 laying around. What's weird is, so the new lower control arms come with what they call a castle nut. I'll show you what that is, but a castle nut has slots in it. Looks like a castle. And it has a cotter pin, and that's what stops the nut from coming off, is a cotter pin. The factory nut, which I just got off, has a nylon insert to help keep it in place. So now that we have that off, we need to jack up the lower control arm. Because once we get our pickle fork, which we need to put in between the control arm and the ball joint and the knuckle, and we hit.
Alright, well, off camera, I was able to knock that loose. The strut is in. This coilover is in, ready for the lower control arm to be removed. We still have the intake and the fuel rail to put on. I feel like this is a great stopping point for today. So this was video 1. It's probably going to be a 2 or 3 part series, but we will eventually have the K-member in. We'll have the coilover set up on. We'll have all of our other issues fixed, and maybe we can take it for a drive finally. So that's it for this part 1. Part 2 will be out in a week. Thanks again, and I hope you liked the video. Please consider subscribing, and hopefully you guys get some valuable information from this. If not, and you've already done it before, hopefully you'll just consider giving me a like and a subscribe. I'm Zach, and I'll see you next time.